Hey everybody, it is fall, finally, here on Muggles and Mocha. It is a good 50-something, 60-something degrees outside, and so I thought I would pull out some fall attire, and it looks like I'm wearing a large blanket, but hey, what more could you ask for? I hope you all have had a great week. I first want to say thank you because I got some great feedback on the Gilderoy Lockhart article, which was really satisfying because, as you guys know, I was very excited about that one so that I could be angry about Gilderoy Lockhart, and I'm just glad that you guys liked it. I got a lot of awesome comments, so thank you for that. I love reading those, so keep them coming. If you haven't gotten to watch that video yet or the article, you can check it out up here. I always point the wrong way. It's somewhere on the screen. Click it and watch it and bash Lockhart with us because it was a good old time. But if you are new here, first of all, welcome to our Harry Potter book club. We're going through every single book one chapter at a time. We're currently on the second. This book club is connected to my editing website, MadisonKdarby.com, where I offer different book editing services and writing services, so check that out if that's something you're interested in. You can also follow me on social media through that website if you're interested. And if you enjoyed this video today, feel free to give it a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can keep up to date with all of our Harry Potter rants, as well as diving into some interesting stuff about the books, of course. This week, we have a darker chapter, in my opinion, as far as its underlying themes go. It's cool that the seeds of darkness, for lack of a better word, are sown this early on in the book series. Even though Harry is young at this point, we find him facing some difficult ideas that are going to affect the entire series. Honestly, to me, the crux of the series is discovered in this chapter. And I talk about this a little bit in my article for this week. You can find that in the description box of this video. While this chapter is full of humor and some fun, it does involve the first use of the term mudblood, which is going to be something that comes back over and over, and like I said, really factors into the main theme of this book when it comes especially to Voldemort's plans. We're going to talk about the term mudblood a little bit more today once we get to that point in the chapter, but in this article specifically, we look at what it means to the wizarding community and its roots, how it came about, how did this discrimination and resentment against Muggleborns and Muggles in general come about. If that is something you're interested in, feel free to click on the article because we talk all about it. And this chapter ends on a very significant note as well. And today we're going to be talking about how that connects to the theme and ideas behind the mudblood terminology. Gosh, I've already said that this book is a big deal. It's one that I don't think gets as much recognition as it should. But man, the further we get into this, and we're only on chapter 7, it's just a very impactful novel when it comes to the rest of the series as a whole. It is just, man, planting the seeds. That's what we're doing today. So grab your coffee and let's get started on chapter 7, Mudbloods and Murmurs. So we start this chapter with a thought about Gilderoy Lockhart, which is fitting since we just had a chapter that was all about him. And honestly, you know, I talked about Lockhart last week a lot as far as complaining about him, but he really is a good character for what he accomplishes for this book. And it's well established how Harry is going to be interacting with him, and even how he interacts with the rest of the cast that we've already been introduced to. And at the beginning of this chapter, we see Harry trying to avoid him as much as possible, which is going to be the story of his life for this book. Then we get our first Quidditch practice of the season. With all the fun I've had with Quidditch, you know, I've talked before about the rules and what you think about them. I really enjoy the times when we get to see Harry play it and be put in the position where we can hear his thoughts about the sport, because we just get to see how passionate of a kid he is about something that's not surviving or Snape or school. It's a place for us to really see Harry in his element. And we also get another character in this chapter that we haven't talked about too much yet, and that is Colin Creevey. Oh, Colin. I think the actor who plays him in the movie really does a wonderful job. And Colin, you know, we grow to love him. He's just that annoying little kid that follows you around and is, obsessed with you. He insists on accompanying Harry to a Quidditch practice. And actually, this first part before Harry gets to Quidditch practice is a clever little exposition moment where the book explains to readers who might not be familiar with the rules of Quidditch what Quidditch is. As we'll talk about, especially in the later books, I'm not one to really enjoy heavy exposition, especially about things that we already know. But in this case, I think that J.K. Rowling does it in a nice way that we probably don't even realize it's happening because we're just too busy focusing on Colin Creevey and trying to figure out more about who this kid is. And speaking of Colin, I mentioned this last week also, but I love how Lockhart is a bit of a foil to Harry, because in moments like these where you have a character like Colin Creevey chasing Harry around, we learn a lot about who Harry is as a person and how he reacts to the fame that accompanies him wherever he goes. Because many people would love for someone to be so interested in them like Colin is, even though he's annoying and talks 90 to nothing most of the time. He's asking Harry questions about himself. He's genuinely interested in what Harry's doing and who he is, and he wants to take pictures of him and whatever. If this were Gilderoy Lockhart that he was doing this to, he would be telling him the next question to ask, like, oh, how about you ask me about this next and this and this? But Harry isn't like that. This isn't something he's interested in, and he doesn't dwell on what other people think of him when it comes to his fame. Like, he doesn't relish in the fact that he's constantly looked at by other people, unlike Lockhart or even characters like Malfoy would. So Quidditch practice starts, and we get the chance to see Oliver Wood just being the most focused, obsessed team captain ever. I love his character. So at this point, we're getting into the meat of the chapter, and this is the main event that's going to just affect the rest of our video today. So we see Draco Malfoy, which we're all familiar with who this kid is at this point. He's become the Slytherin Seeker, which stinks until you learn why. His dad bought the entire team the latest brooms, the Nimbus 2001. And they're all flashing him around and whatever, but Hermione has the best response to this and accuses Draco of buying his way into the team, which is very, very true. Even if Draco does have some talent, which we know that he does, he's used to just whipping his power around and get whatever he wants, and we see that here too. And actually, I love how Emma Watson plays out this scene. It's actually, I think, the exact line that is in the book, but she's got this little head motion going on, and Emma Watson, can we just for a moment talk about how awesome she is? The queen. After Hermione says this to Malfoy, he uses an insult that sets the whole team off. And at this point, it's a word that we've never heard before. I'm not going to rant, but this is just an important moment. It is the term mudblood. And like I mentioned, my article for this week is about the creation of this discriminatory mindset against Muggles and Muggleborns, and it actually dates back to the introduction of the International Statute of Secrecy, which, as we know, is a very important law to Harry throughout this book series. So, the idea of mudbloods are people not marrying Muggles, and Muggleborns being hated among certain wizards. It wasn't something that was as present as what we see in the Harry Potter series or what would have been there during even Voldemort's time growing up. So briefly, I know you guys have already probably read the chapter, but mudblood is a term that wizards use for Muggle-born wizards who weren't born of wizard parents. And I actually want to talk about the nature of this type of insult, this type of action that Malfoy does here, and basically Malfoy's whole persona in the books. Because even though this idea extends into more dangerous territory, i.e. Voldemort, Malfoy more so represents the group of people who flippantly view Muggleborns as lesser humans, lesser creatures. It's still awful. They view them as having dirty blood, as Ron points out, and it's a disgusting concept, especially for us Muggles who are reading it, which is a little weird to think about, but I want to talk about that for a second. I like the way this was done in the books because instead of looking at discrimination like this from an outsider's perspective, such as we do with house elves later on, we are the ones who can identify with the person being discriminated against, Hermione, because besides being a witch, she's like us. we're Muggles. We just have to face it at some point in our lives. And also, I know this universe isn't real, but just give me a second, okay, to explain. By being in the same position as the victim, and especially if you're reading this at a young age like I was, a lot of us grew up on the Harry Potter series, we begin to understand what it feels like to be in a position of discrimination, which helps us be able to relate to Hermione, to their whole view of this being an upsetting concept, because we're not looking at it from the outside. If we were in Hermione's position, Malfoy would be calling us a mudblood. So it automatically puts us in a position of empathy where we're able to understand and relate to these characters going forward even more. And reading it about it happening to a character we all love also helps our sympathy toward Hermione and builds our anger further about what this term means and represents. And as with everything Malfoy does, we know this discrimination stems for a desire for power over other people. If I could describe Malfoy in any way, that is it. He's constantly looking for ways to get ahead and how to stomp people down just so he can be on top. And this is another way for him to do that. And honestly, this is what all discrimination stems from. It's just a need to knock people down so that you can be in power over them. But we're going to just keep this within the realm of Harry Potter for now. After Malfoy says this, we automatically realize this is a terrible term because everyone freaks out, and the scene ends with Ron vomiting slugs everywhere due to his malfunctioning wand. They immediately take him to Hagrid's hut, and to guess who is there? Gilderoy Lockhart. Can we not get away from him for 10 minutes? We then get a really, really important moment in this book that's different than the way it is done in the movie, and that is that we get the explanation of what mudblood means from Ron instead of Hermione. Now, honestly, I think it's way better that we get it from Ron for a couple of reasons. This is something we talked about in last book, but I really think that Ron just gets a bad rap from the movies because they leave out some awesome moments from him. You know, we talked about it in The Sorcerer's Stone when they're going after the Sorcerer's Stone, and a couple of things that he does during those challenges that we don't get in the movies. And this is another moment that I think that we are really able to see a lot about Ron and his character from the conversation that goes on here. In this scene, we have, of course, also seen Ron's bravery in standing up to Malfoy, his care for his friends and his future wife, But here we also see how his blood status, and Ron is a pureblood, hasn't affected his views of the world. He views everyone as equal and nobly defends Muggleborns, which is something that he's been taught from a young age from his father. And like I said, this is especially important because the Weasley family are purebloods. But not only that, they're on a list of pureblood families called the Sacred 28. This was a pureblood directory released in the 1930s, and it listed the 28 pureblood families basically to stoke the fire and animosity between wizards and Muggleborns. Now, the Weasleys were on that list, and they could very well have been like the majority of the other families that were on this list in embracing this destructive way of thinking and holding their name above others simply because of their ancestry. But they didn't. Honestly, if you check out this list, most of the names are recognizable as the last names of Voldemort's followers. So this list, or just the pureblood families in general, took this very seriously to the point that they started following a murderer who hated Muggleborns. So once again, we see how the Weasley family, and Ron in this instance, are just so loving toward others and grounded in noble principles, even though they could very well have chosen the other side, like they had the ability to do that. So Weasley appreciation thought and Ron appreciation thought. He talks about this idea very well, I think, and just really shows what he stands for as a person. I'm really liking Ron more this time around reading the series, honestly. So, to move on, we reach the end of the chapter. Even though it doesn't feel like much happened in this chapter, I feel like this was kind of a longer chapter. I had briefly considered joining it with the next one, but it was so many pages. It was like 40 pages between the two of them, so here we are. The last thing we cover are Harry and Ron's detentions from crashing the flying car into the Whomping Willow. Detentions, I believe, were deserved. And of course, Harry is with a Lockhart. I didn't notice how much Lockhart is just around until reading it this time around, and it makes me even more afraid for the 5th book with Umbridge. Y'all, I don't know if I'm going to make it through it, like, with my sanity. But enough about Umbridge. We don't have to think about her yet. We end on a very important note. Harry hears the disembodied voice. Now, Parseltongue and the entire nature of that skill and how it impacts Harry's life is going to be something we're going to discuss because it is a very important component of this book. But it's a can of worms I don't have time to really open up today. But like I said, there's going to be plenty of time in this book to talk about it, so don't worry. It's a skill that guides Harry through the rest of this book and brings up some interesting questions about who he is, what he thinks of himself, what he thinks he is meant to do. Does he belong in Slytherin? Like, man. Very excited about this, and I actually think we've talked about it before because I'm just so excited about it. But what I noticed in this situation more than Parseltongue being introduced is the significance of this event happening at the end of this specific chapter. Like we've talked about, we've just learned about the term Mudblood and the ideology behind it. Now Harry hears a whispering voice about death and killing. Little does he know that just hours after hearing this word, Muggleborn, he is actually hearing a creature that was created to hunt Muggleborns that is currently being guided by the person who hates them probably more than anyone else in the book series, which would be Voldemort through Tom Riddle's diary. And I just think it was so clever to put all of this in the same chapter because we start off seeing the full spectrum of this hateful idea of Mudblood and what it could really mean when taken to its logical conclusion and actually acted on in a practical way. The spectrum we see shows how awful the idea is, but we see it in 2 different forms. First, Malfoy represents the majority of the group who think this way, who is, just throwing out the insult Mudblood, who's viewing themselves in a position of power, kind of the younger baby brother of this huge idea. And then we see a glimpse into Voldemort and what this idea can become. Because not only does Voldemort despise Muggleborns and think they shouldn't be worthy to study magic, which is kind of the basis of the idea, he has a monster running around that kills them. And has no issue with doing that. It's a big idea of thinking that Muggles dirty up the blood of wizard kind, which, oh man. Y'all, this is like a huge topic, and we're probably gonna have just a video on Voldemort as a character, because this idea not only is something that he uses to guide his plans, but it's something that drives who he is as a person, and this idea that he was born of a Muggle father and hated him and thinks that he deserves all the power in the world and to control everyone, and yet he still has this Muggle father hanging over him. And I don't know, it's very tied up in a lot of stuff that goes on in Voldemort's character. But here we see how it could play out practically in the wizarding world when it comes to, murdering Muggleborns. So, in a nutshell, this chapter introduces us to the concept of Mudblood, while also showing us the horrifying conclusion that Voldemort has come to, even though we don't realize that that's what's happening yet. And of course, Harry also doesn't know what this voice is, and that's how we end the chapter. Keeping his voice low so as not to wake Neville, Dean, and Seamus, Harry told Ron exactly what he had heard. And Lockhart said he couldn't hear it, said Ron. Harry could see him frowning in the moonlight. Do you think he was lying? But I don't get it. Even someone invisible would have had to open the door. I know, said Harry, lying back in his 4-poster and staring at the canopy above him. I don't get it either. So mysterious. So that's the end of chapter 7. And man, this is a fun chapter to dive into. Like, we are getting into it now. Like, we start with the dark theme so early in this series, and I can't wait. Next week we have Halloween and the Death Day party, which didn't make it into the movies, and it's one of those that I don't mind too much that it wasn't there. But I might change my mind about that next week. Maybe it's going to be just an awesome, awesome chapter. We are going to dive into the concept of ghosts and death, which will be fun. And then we'll get to end on the shocking scene that our trio finds at the end of the chapter that will really propel us into the main plot of this book. Thanks for tuning in today. Feel free to comment if you have any thoughts about this and the idea of Muggleborns and Mudblood and Wizard Kind and how you think that affects the series as a whole. I'd love to hear about it. And I will see you next week when we talk about Chapter 8. So, goodbye.